It was early morning in New York City, the city of dreams. The sun had just started to peek over the skyline, casting golden light over the busy streets. The usual hustle and bustle of Manhattan had begun. But on a quiet corner, just a few blocks away from the towering skyscrapers, a man named Amir stood in the shadows, his back pressed against the cold brick wall of an old building. Amir had been in this country for 6 months. 6 months of uncertainty, fear, and loneliness. He had come to the United States from Syria, fleeing the violence that had shattered his homeland. His journey had been long, filled with moments of terror and sadness, but at least he had made it here. In New York, a city that had welcomed refugees from all over the world, he hoped to find peace, work, and a fresh start. But reality had been harder than he had imagined. The city's energy, its promise of opportunity, was both overwhelming and distant to Amir. He spent most of his days walking around the city, trying to find small jobs, anything to make ends meet. But the language barrier, his lack of experience, and the absence of a network had made it almost impossible to find consistent work. His pockets were always empty, and he had no family or friends to lean on. His heart was heavy, his spirit weary. Still, he pushed forward, driven by the belief that things would eventually get better. That morning, Amir was on his way to a local grocery store to buy whatever scraps he could afford. He hadn't eaten much the day before, just a small portion of rice and beans he had found in a food pantry. As he walked down the sidewalk, he noticed an elderly woman struggling with her bags of groceries. She was walking slowly, her steps deliberate and tired, and the bags seemed heavy for her frail frame. The woman's short white hair fluttered in the breeze, and her face showed signs of age, but there was a kindness in her eyes. Amir hesitated. It wasn't that he didn't want to help. It was that he felt like he had nothing to give. What if she thought he was just another beggar? What if she rejected him? But then something inside him stirred. Perhaps the old kindness his mother had instilled in him when he was a boy. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly, his voice still thick with his accent. "Can I help you with your groceries?" The woman stopped, looking up at him with a slight surprise in her eyes, but then a warm smile appeared on her face. She studied him for a moment, noticing his worn-out clothes, his tired eyes. "Oh, that's kind of you, young man," she said, her voice gentle but strong. "I could use a hand. These bags are a bit heavy for me these days." Without saying another word, Amir took the bags from her, feeling the weight of them in his hands. As he did, he noticed that she had a slight limp. He wondered how often she had to walk to the store, carrying heavy bags all by herself. He didn't speak, just focused on helping her as they made their way to her apartment, a few blocks away. The old woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Peterson, talked to him as they walked. Her voice was soothing, like a quiet melody, and she spoke with a wisdom that only age and experience could bring. "You know," she said, "I've lived in this neighborhood for over 40 years. It's a beautiful city, but it can be tough on people. People forget that there's more to life than just the busy streets and the big buildings. There's kindness, too. It's what keeps us going." Amir nodded silently. He didn't know what to say. His own life felt like a series of struggles, moving from one place to another, constantly searching for something better, but never finding it. The weight of his past, the loss of his home, and the uncertainty of his future made it hard for him to connect with people. But something about Mrs. Peterson's words made him feel a flicker of hope, a faint belief that maybe, just maybe, things could turn around. When they reached her apartment, Mrs. Peterson invited Amir in for a cup of tea. He hesitated, unsure if he should, but her insistence was kind and warm, and he felt too tired to refuse. She led him to her small but cozy living room, filled with old furniture and pictures of her family on the walls. The room smelled like lavender and old books. It was a place of comfort, a place where time seemed to slow down. "Please, have a seat," she said, gesturing to an armchair by the window. "I don't get many visitors these days, but I'm glad you stopped by." Amir sat down, his hands still feeling the bags of groceries. The warm cup of tea she handed him felt soothing, the steam rising in gentle tendrils. "Where are you from, Amir?" Mrs. Peterson asked, her eyes curious. I am from Syria," he said, his voice quiet. "I came here to escape the war, to find peace, but it has been difficult. I do not have a job, a home. I do not know what to do." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes softening as she listened to his words. Amir could feel the weight of her gaze, as if she could see right through him, past the tiredness, past the fear. It was as though she knew the pain he carried in his heart. "I understand," she said finally, her voice kind but firm. "The world can be a hard place, especially for someone starting over. But you know, Amir, everyone deserves a second chance. Sometimes, all it takes is one person who believes in you." Amir's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what she meant by that, but her words hung in the air like a promise. Mrs. Peterson smiled at him, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of wisdom and kindness. "You helped me today, Amir," she continued. "I believe in the power of kindness, and because of that, I'm going to help you. We'll find a way to get you back on your feet." Amir's breath caught in his throat. Was this real? Could this stranger, this kind woman who had barely known him for a few hours, really offer him the help he so desperately needed? He didn't know what to say, but his heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. In a city of millions, where he had often felt invisible, here was someone who saw him, who saw his struggle, his humanity. As the tea grew cold and the hours passed, Mrs. Peterson told Amir about her work with local charities and how she often helped people in need. She made him promise to stay in touch, to reach out whenever he needed help. And for the first time in a long time, Amir felt like he wasn't alone. He felt like maybe, just maybe, his life could change. Little did he know, this meeting was the beginning of something he had never expected. A second chance. The days that followed were a blur for Amir. The weight of the promise Mrs. Peterson had made to him lingered in his mind like a light in the dark. He couldn't help but wonder if it was all a dream, if kindness like that really existed. But it didn't take long for him to realize that it was all very real. Amir returned to Mrs. Peterson's apartment a few days later. He had made a point to keep his promise to himself, to follow up on her offer, despite the storm of doubt that churned in his heart. He wasn't used to people helping him, especially strangers, and he wasn't sure what to expect. When he knocked on her door, he was greeted with her familiar warm smile. "Well, look who's here," she said, opening the door wide. "I was wondering when you'd come by again." Amir gave a shy smile, feeling a bit unsure of what to say. He had been so caught up in his own thoughts the last few days that he hadn't really figured out how to begin this new chapter of his life. I wasn't sure if you really meant it, Amir said, his voice betraying his uncertainty. Mrs. Peterson laughed softly, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of kindness and mischief. She stepped aside and motioned for him to come in. "Of course, I meant it," she said. "I don't make promises I can't keep. Come in. Let's talk about your next steps." Amir stepped inside, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. The cozy, warm apartment seemed to offer a sanctuary, a safe haven from the chaos of the world outside. He felt a quiet sense of belonging there, even though it had only been a short time since they first met. As Amir settled into the armchair by the window once more, Mrs. Peterson went into the kitchen and returned with a tray of tea, freshly brewed. "Now," she began, sitting across from him, "we need to make a plan. You've been here for several months, right? And from what you've told me, it's been hard to find work." Amir nodded, the words catching in his throat. "Yes, it's been very difficult. I've applied to many places, but they always turn me away. I don't have experience, and my English is not perfect." Mrs. Peterson's gaze softened. "That's understandable, but I think we can work with what you have. I've been helping refugees and immigrants for a long time, and I know a few people who could be a great help to you." Amir's heart skipped a beat. Could she really be serious? Was there a way for him to find work? Could he actually have a chance at a new life in this city? She continued, her voice steady and reassuring. "There's a nonprofit organization I work with. They specialize in helping refugees and immigrants like you. They offer job training, language courses, and help with resumes. And I know they have connections to companies that hire people in your situation. You have skills, Amir. I can tell. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time." Amir listened intently, hanging on every word. A glimmer of hope began to stir within him. He had always believed that his past, his experiences as a refugee, had made him unworthy of a second chance. But here was Mrs. Peterson, telling him that his story was not a curse, but a path that could lead to something greater. "Do you really think they would hire me?" Amir asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. Mrs. Peterson smiled warmly. "I know they would. But before we get to that, there's something else I need to do for you." She got up from her seat and disappeared down the hallway. Amir sat there, his mind racing. What more could she possibly do for him? She had already given him more hope than he had in months, but now it felt like she was about to reveal another layer of kindness. When she returned, she was holding a folder in her hands. She placed it on the table in front of Amir. "I've also made a few calls," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "And I've found a temporary place for you to stay. It's not much, but it's a roof over your head. It's a shared apartment, but it's safe, and it's affordable. You don't have to worry about where you'll sleep for now." Amir stared at the folder in disbelief. He had never imagined that someone would go so far to help him. He didn't even know how to react. His heart felt full, and at the same time, it felt as though his chest might burst. There were no words for the overwhelming gratitude that flooded through him. I don't know what to say. You've done more for me than anyone ever has," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Mrs. Peterson's face softened, her eyes filled with compassion. "You don't need to say anything, Amir. Just use this as a stepping stone. This is your chance. All I ask is that you never give up. You've made it this far, and I know you can make it even further." Amir felt a tear slide down his cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of gratitude, of disbelief, and of hope. He had come to America seeking refuge, but what he hadn't expected was to find someone like Mrs. Peterson, a person who had shown him that even in a city as big as New York, kindness still had the power to change a life. "I will never forget this," he said softly. "Thank you." Mrs. Peterson patted his hand gently. "It's nothing, Amir. Now, let's get you settled in with the organization I mentioned. And from there, we'll figure out the rest." The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Amir. With Mrs. Peterson's help, he enrolled in a language course and began attending job training at the nonprofit. Slowly, his confidence began to grow. The language barrier that had once seemed insurmountable began to shrink, and his skills he had once thought were meaningless, became valuable again. He learned how to write a resume, how to interview for jobs, and how to adapt to his new life in America. But the biggest change came when he landed his first job. It wasn't a high-paying position. It was an entry-level job at a local warehouse, but it was a start. It was something real. For the first time since arriving in the United States, Amir felt like he was on solid ground. And it was all because of one simple act of kindness from a stranger. It had been 2 months since Amir started his job at the warehouse, and his life had already begun to change in ways he could hardly have imagined. The days were long, and the work was hard, but each day he felt a growing sense of pride in his ability to support himself. His English had improved, and he had made a few friends at work, fellow immigrants who, like him, were striving for a better future. Every paycheck he received felt like a small victory, a reminder that he was no longer dependent on the generosity of others, but rather he was standing on his own 2 feet. But even as his life was slowly coming together, Amir couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something missing. He had a job, he had a place to stay, but deep down he knew that he hadn't fully healed from the trauma of his past. The memories of the war, the loss of his home, the separation from his family, they still haunted him. And although he had made incredible strides in his journey, he still felt a deep ache in his heart. Every Sunday, after his long work week, Amir would take a walk through Central Park. It was his way of reconnecting with himself, of finding a little peace amidst the chaos of the city. On one such walk, as he strolled by the lake, he spotted Mrs. Peterson sitting on a bench, reading a book. She looked up and saw him immediately, her face lighting up with a warm smile. She closed her book and patted the seat next to her. "Amir, I'm so glad you stopped by," she said, her voice filled with warmth. Amir smiled and sat down next to her. "I come here to clear my mind," he explained. "The city can be overwhelming sometimes, but I always feel better after I walk through the park." Mrs. Peterson nodded knowingly. "I understand. It's important to find a space where you can breathe, a place where the world feels a little smaller. How have things been going?" "Good, actually," Amir replied. "I've been working at the warehouse, and I'm getting the hang of it. I'm learning a lot. It's not much, but it's something. I can support myself now." "I'm proud of you, Amir," she said, her eyes softening. "You've worked hard to get here, but I can tell you're still carrying something heavy." I've seen it in your eyes. You're not just building a new life. You're trying to forget a past that's not easy to forget." Amir paused, the lump in his throat growing. He had tried so hard to bury those memories, to push them down and keep moving forward. But no matter how much he worked or how much he improved his life, the shadows of his past always seemed to find him. "I don't know if I'll ever forget it," Amir said quietly. "I've lost so much. I don't have a family anymore. I don't even know where they are. I just want peace." Mrs. Peterson's expression softened even further. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to forget your past, Amir," she said softly. "It's a part of who you are, and it shaped you into the person you've become. But what you can do is find a way to live with it, to honor it, and to move forward without letting it control you. And I know you can do that." Amir looked at her, her words sinking deep into his heart. He had always thought that in order to move forward, he had to erase the past, bury it completely. But Mrs. Peterson was telling him something different, that the past didn't need to define him, but it also didn't need to be forgotten. It was a part of his story, and that story could still have a future. "You've already come so far, Amir," she continued, "and you have so much more ahead of you. You don't need to do it alone." Amir's eyes filled with tears. He had always felt alone, even in the midst of the city's crowded streets. But Mrs. Peterson had shown him that there was more to life than just surviving. There was living, and there was hope. "I don't know what to say," Amir whispered. "Thank you. Thank you for everything." Mrs. Peterson smiled, squeezing his arm. "You don't have to say anything. You're here now, and that's enough. You're exactly where you need to be." As they sat there in the peaceful quiet of Central Park, a sense of calm washed over Amir. For the first time in a long time, he felt a deep sense of peace within himself. The weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter, the storm in his heart a little less fierce. Weeks went by, and Amir continued to work at the warehouse. But his life had begun to take shape in ways he had never expected. His relationships with his co-workers grew stronger, and his confidence continued to rise. He had started taking evening classes to improve his English even further. And he began to dream of a future where he could do more, where he could help others, just as Mrs. Peterson had helped him. One day, as he was leaving work, he received a call from Mrs. Peterson. "Amir, I have something to tell you," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "I've been speaking with the charity I work with, and they have a program where they help refugees and immigrants like you transition into full-time work in professional fields. They've asked if you would be interested in applying for a position that matches your skills." Amir's heart skipped a beat. A professional position? He could hardly believe it. This was a chance for him to finally take that next step, to leave behind the uncertainty of his current job and move into a new phase of his life. "Yes, yes, of course," Amir exclaimed, his voice trembling with excitement. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of interviews and preparations. Mrs. Peterson guided him through the entire process, helping him with his resume and preparing him for the interview. And when the day finally came, Amir walked into that office, not as a struggling refugee, but as a man determined to make the most of this second chance. And he did. Amir got the job. The job wasn't just a position, it was a life-altering opportunity. It gave him the financial stability he had always dreamed of, and it gave him the chance to build a future, to become a part of something bigger than himself. And as he stood in the office on his first day, he knew that it was because of one woman's simple act of kindness that he had been able to transform his life. But Mrs. Peterson's gift to Amir didn't stop there. She continued to be a guiding light in his life, always offering support, always believing in him. And just as she had promised, Amir never gave up. He continued to rise, one step at a time, knowing that he was not alone. And one day, as Amir looked out over the city, he realized that he had found not only a new home, but also a new purpose. He was no longer just a refugee seeking shelter. He was someone with a future, someone who could give back, just as he had been given so much. In a world that often feels cold and indifferent, Amir had learned that kindness, the simple, selfless act of offering help, has the power to change lives, and he vowed that he would never forget that lesson. For in the end, kindness is the greatest gift we can give, and it is through kindness that we often find our true path. Thank you for watching.